Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new Daddy Issues podcast. It's me, Adam Hunter. I'm here with my man, Nicky Paris, and we got a very special guest today. A very special guest because this guy right here, Al Martin, he gave me my start in comedy. The first comedy club I ever did 22 years ago was the New York Comedy Club, and this guy let me do it, and no one else would. So it's great. He's got a new book out. Al Martin, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, guys. It's great to see two alumni, one from New York Comedy Club, one from Broadway Comedy Club, both, spanning two generations of clubs that I've had, both in LA, living the dream and doing it.
Oh, it was like, I remember the first time I did, I used to do this guy named Ozzy
Yep.
Baez. He was the manager, and I was sweeping the floors to get stage time. That was my way. Well, first I took Chris Murphy's comedy class, and then I got passed I would sweep the floors, and I'll never forget, I was like a month into comedy, and they used to have these prom shows where they bring the whole prom in.
Yes.
At like 3 a.m,
The late
limo
night
would
prom shows.
and
That's right.
I remember all the comics were waiting around 3 a.m, and the limos didn't show up. So then they're like, oh, the prom's canceled, and I had to sweep, and then all of a sudden the limo showed up, and the comics had all left. And Ozzy goes, how much time do you have? I said, I got, 3 minutes. And he goes, can you do 45? I said, sure. At the time I was 19 years old. So I was like, sure, why not? So then Ozzy goes up there, does like a half hour. And then he goes, guys, we got a special guest. We got a comic from Comedy Central and HBO. And I'm looking around to see who he's going to bring on. And he brings me on. And I go up there, and I had like the set of my life because I was only 2 years older than the kids. People were like dropping stuff. And I'm like, hey, can you pick that up? Because I got to sweep it up later. I didn't tell them that, but that's why. And then afterwards, Ozzy made a phone call to Roger Paul. And Roger Paul says to me, hey, man, I hear you're like you got 45 minutes. And I had 3 minutes.
No.
And he goes, we're sending you on the road. You're going to open up for Gemini for the AM edition. So he goes, can you meet it on the West Side Highway in 4 minutes or something? So I'm sure. I packed my bags. This guy pulls up in a van with like chickens in the back. Live chickens.
And the penis puppet. Did he have the penis puppet?
Yes, he had an actual dick puppet, this guy. An actual dick puppet. And then we do Kazi's Comedy Club in West Virginia. And he had a black puppet named Sonny. First we did an all-black club. It was at a black. I thought we were gonna get killed. It was at a black puppet to all black people. I'm like, I'm out of here. But this guy murdered. He actually murdered every night. But that was like,
he's like a road warrior. That guy,
Yeah.
Gemini. There are guys that toil every day of the week in some part of America, and it's kind of a documentary that I'm working on right now. The different types of comics that there are. The comics with the responsible day jobs, and then they're doing the comedy hustle at night. Then there's guys like Gemini who go their whole life in obscurity, but they could probably do an hour on 10 minutes notice,
Yeah, 1,000%.
There's so many people like that. I feel like the best hidden gems are those people too. And Adam, I love that you used to do the prom shows too, because I also got my start at Broadway Comedy Club. So Al, a lot of people probably blame you for that. But here I am regardless. And there was one prom show that I did actually where some girl showed up on Molly. And the weirdest part was she was the only person on the entire prom bus. So she's probably dead right now, that girl.
Oh, it sounds very sad.
It was some of my favorite shows though, because I used to do a lot of material on Amanda Bynes at the time, and when I would do the regular shows, there was audience members who'd be like, "Are you talking about Leanne Rimes?" And I'd be like, "No," but the prom kids would get it.
No, the New York Comedy Club. I remember I used to do. Ozzy booked me. I was for the Puerto Rican show at midnight on Friday nights. I was the only white
That's
comic.
right.
And they all hated me, and rightfully so. I should not have been on that show. But
those late nights were wild at New York Comedy Club because we had the two showrooms.
Yeah.
In one room would be the Latino show, and then the other room would be the African American show, late night. And the people that showed up, and it's in the book, some of the people that popped in to do spots on those shows were unbelievable. Damon Wayans, Tracy Wanda Sykes, Kevin Hart. So you really kind of got to grow up during an unbelievable time.
No, it was the best. I mean, it was like I was 19 years old, and watching this was like, But there was one show where I waited all night to go on, and the comic went on drunk, and he wouldn't get off, and it was in the small room, and the host was like, "Get him off!" Kept lighting him. He wouldn't get off, so he goes and grabs the microphone, and the comic lets go, and he hits himself with the microphone. So he thought he got punched. So he punched the host. Now the host and the comic are fighting each other. The whole crowd runs out, going, "The comics are fighting each other." The lights go on. The cops get called, and then a comic bumps me and goes on. While this is going on, a comic's like, does material. Like every
He had a
night,
better left hook than you.
something
That's why he
crazy.
went on.
You never know what's going to go on at that club at night. Then I don't know, Adam. Do you remember the night your dad came in with you, and he was, I think, your manager at the time? It was
Yeah.
kind of a wild conversation that night too.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. My dad got mad because they like forgot I had to buy drinks. It was something where like I didn't go on, or I wanted to go on. But my dad and me one time went to the New York Comedy Club, and there was like 4 people there, 4 in the big room, and I went on, and then Chappelle came by. And it was like right after Chappelle did the Nutty Professor. He was still like famous, but he wasn't like just as famous as he is now. And he did an hour and a half for 4 people. And it was me, and he murdered. And me and my dad still remember that. Like it was one of the best moments we've ever had as a father-son comedy, because we got to watch Chappelle do an hour and a half for 5 people. And he treated it like it was like, Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. He was, he's of that I mean, he started when he was 17, I think, in Washington. And, so he's been doing it a long. He's a pro, he just wants to get on stage and do what he's got to do.
Yeah.
And he grew up during those days in the Village, the Boston Comedy Club, where you just get up no matter what because the Boston Comedy Club was kind of weird. They would start, and Greenwich is a little that way too. In the Village, it's not, a lot of comedy clubs open at 9 o'clock or have their show at 9 on a weeknight. In the Village, you don't get started till like 9:45, and then there's 2 people in the room. You got to start entertaining them, or else they get up and leave. And the most frustrating part is when you have 2 people and they leave, and then another 2 come in, they leave. If everybody had stayed, you wind up having a show, after about 15 minutes. But nobody wants to be the only one in there. That's why you got to start right away as soon as someone is seated, and then the audience builds.
John Mooney told me one time at the New York Comedy Club. Mooney was telling me how there was a comic that was up there bombing, and then a rat came on stage, and and then everyone started screaming like "ah!" And the comic thought he was
That would
killing.
be New York Comedy Club for sure.
Yeah, and the comic thought he was killing, so he just kept going harder. But it was the rat that was killing, and the rat was making everybody scream, yell. Those are some.
I'm surprised the audience stayed.
Those are some of the best times of my life, honestly. Al, like
same.
That was a real comedy club. Like that was like legit. The crowd gave you nothing. They weren't going to give you anything. Like you had
to earn it.
You had to earn it. And
that's a typical New York crowd. You really kind of have to earn it, And I always find that when comedians from Los Angeles come to New York, they have a lot more difficulty than comics that come from New York to LA. I've noticed that. Maybe it's just my own bias.
Me too, Al. Me too.
You notice that? Yeah. I mean, something about comedy in New York toughens you really and gives you like a real hard edge approach. And, some of these guys from LA, they come here and they're like a deer in headlights, and
I feel like for New York, it's like anything in New York. I feel like bullshit walks, and there's so many actors I feel like out here that just think that they could do stand up. Like, no, you actually just did a monologue. And when you go to New York and you hear the silence, I feel like you earn your stripes. And me and Adam said, we both were lucky enough to come up at your clubs and earn our stripes, and we had that experience. I mean, there's been so many people that have started in your club. Everybody from Lisa Lampanelli. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Who has been some acts who have been the most acts that you're most proud of that have been on your stage?
Well, even though I don't necessarily always get along with him, but Jim Gaffigan certainly is one of them. He just works extremely hard at what he does. He did not care about audience sizes or whatever. He would go up on stage. He used to run from, Gladys, of course, Nikki, she had a room on 2nd Avenue and 48th Street. And the original, no, she had a 2nd and 50th, and New York Comedy Club was on 2nd and 48th. So it was like a little mini circuit that comics would run back and forth and back and forth. And that Jim Gaffigan would do. And, he wound up becoming who he is today. But there are so many others. I mean, the late night shows now are so highly represented by people that came up through our ranks. The head writer on the Jimmy Kimmel show used to be my intern. Did the same thing that you used to do. Yeah, Gary
I
Greenberg.
was an intern. I used to work the door.
I remember Gary Greenberg would only get booked on like camp shows, and he was like the cleanest. I mean, he was funny guy, but like I used to do every day. He used to be like, "Oh, we got a camp show." They're like, "Call Gary Greenberg," because he had like a kids book, and he was so funny though, and he's a nice guy too. And then now he's like, he's the head of Jimmy Kimmel, the head writer.
Head writer on Jimmy Kimmel. Laurie Kilmartin's now a writer on Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
And I found Laurie Kilmartin in the small room. She was doing a produced show in there, and I just happened to walk in and hear her and thought she was unbelievably funny, and I wound up booking her. And of course, Adam Glynn, he's done very well for himself.
I love Adam Glynn.
Yeah,
and Mike Bichetti was an intern.
Mike
Bichetti used to sweep the floors at New York Comedy Club in the very, very early days. So I'm very, those are the ones I'm really proud of. The ones that didn't complain, didn't bitch, didn't moan. They just had to go in there, work an angle to get stage time, and they worked the system, and they went on ahead to do good things in their careers.
I remember.
Al, do you know that I stepped in? Al, do you know that I stepped in human shit as an intern?
Listen, I'm sure you did.
There was one night in the basement, there was some guy who was heckling. I think he had something wrong with him, or maybe I'm just giving him the benefit of the doubt. And security carried him out, and while they escorted him up the stairs, he shit his pants through his jeans, and it came at the bottom. And then who comes prancing into the club? Me, of course, not looking down, and I stepped right in the shit. And you know what? I left
saying hello, you're hugging everybody.
Right, you know me. And I left my shoes there that night. I drove back to Staten Island barefoot. I said, I can't bring these shoes home to my mother.
And hit a deer, right?
Yeah, that's right. On the way back.
I remember like on those midnight shows on Friday nights, Tracy Morgan every night would come from Saturday Night Live and just hang out in the green room after.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was the angriest.
Jay Farrow too. There were so many people who would just walk in.
Jay Farrow. It's like, people ask me to think about, and then you think about all the people through the years that have come in there and worked the room. Jimmy Fallon used to come in a lot and just hang out and watch the shows. He didn't always go up. He would just sit there and watch. So. There were, and then some of the audience members, the tennis pro Andre Agassi came in one Saturday night and was watching the show in the audience. Kurt, talk about diverse audiences. Kurt Vonnegut, the writer, used to love to come into open mics on Monday afternoons at 5:30, order a cocktail, and just sit there and watch the open mics. This guy must be working on a project or something. But
really, what he just likes watching humans struggle.
Whatever it was. This like famous author is sitting there watching open micers, and he would be there religiously every Monday watching the open mic. It was crazy.
It's one way to feel better about yourself.
I remember.
It's funny.
I used to see Al every single night. And he would never get dressed up. He'd come in, he was like the real guy. And one night you came in wearing like a suit. And I was like, oh, what's the big occasion? And there was a limo outside. And he was like, oh, I'm going to go see WWE wrestling. So that was the only time you got dressed up.
Actually, I think it was, you know what? I think I remember that night, Adam. That night, actually, it was a Knick game that I was going to. We had a comic, I don't know if either of you remember her. Her name was Elizabeth Ray. Elizabeth Ray was one of the first, if you Google it, she was one of the first sex scandals in Washington. She
Wow.
was the secretary who couldn't type. And
Wow.
she wound up sinking this guy named Congressman Wayne Hayes, who was the House of the head of the House Ways and Means Committee. He was the chairman, and they discovered that she was working for him, and she didn't have any idea how to type. You know, she was a receptionist who
Wow.
couldn't type,
She's a
and
pioneer.
yeah, it brought down his whole office. He had to wind up resigning from Congress, and I think he got a
Wow.
divorce. Who knows? I mean, it was a mess. But 7 or 8 years later, she pops up at New York Comedy Club and wants to do stand-up comedy. I get them on the way up and on the way down.
Well, I saw you just had Jenna Bush there, right? George Bush's daughter
Yes,
just did stand up for the first time at the club.
she did. What happened was NBC wanted. She always had a dream of doing stand-up comedy, and she came down to the club. Wally Collins worked with her for
Oh.
about 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon, and they wrote a 3-minute bit. And she did it that night at the club, and it was on the Today Show. It aired on the
Oh my
Today Show.
God.
Can't get
Wow.
better publicity than that, right?
Wally Collins was some of the fun. I remember he used to go on stage and they used to have comment cards, and he would tell the crowd in his act, everybody pick up your thing, fill out the comment cards, tell them to please put more money into this club. And he would tell the crowd to write that during his set. I was like, there was wait,
Well,
so
that's different than Janice Massetti. You remember Janice Massetti?
Oh my God.
of
I
course.
love
Janice
Janice.
Massetti used to go up to audience members after the show and make them write her name down on the comment
Yep.
card.
Fuck,
That's my girl.
And Rob Falcone used to do that also.
well, Steve
He-
Marshall, people used to hate following Steve Marshall because
Oh yeah.
he would murder. I mean, every single table he would go. And then at the end, he'd do crowd work. Like I've never seen anybody do crowd work before. And then at the end, he would give out his business cards while the other comic was on stage. And they'd be like, hey, do you go table to table?
Talk
Get
about working a room, right? I mean,
Wait, Steve Marshall was the equivalent of like seeing Spider-Man on Broadway. Like I feel like he literally was on every aspect of the room. I wouldn't be surprised if he descended from the ceiling at one point.
He makes me laugh.
I love him.
There's a guy that like I really hope he finally one day gets the recognition he deserves because he's a straight
he really
murderer.
should, yes.
He's a killer.
Yeah, a lot of comics who have more recognition than he does couldn't follow him in a million years. So that's the weird thing about this business. It's just very, very weird. And he's the kind of guy that toils in obscurity, and he's getting more and more work and stuff. But Jesus, did it have to take 35 years? I mean, that just tells you what this business is about.
Right.
No, who's the person that you were like, they're okay, and then all of a sudden you're just like, I mean, for me that was Ed Helms, because Ed Helms used to run the Bringer show at Boston Comedy Club, and he was a funny guy, but I thought he was just a kind of a maybe slightly above average comic. Then he got the Daily Show, then he's on The Office, and next thing you know, he's like a huge movie star. Ed Helms, good for him. I mean, but there's a guy that if you were like, if you put Wally Collins and Ed Helms next to each other and told me who's the funnier, who's the bigger star, Wally Collins 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah, well, for me, watching it, when I first started, I used to do open mics with Judah Friedlander and Sarah Silverman, and if you had to ask me, Sarah Silverman always had the look to kind of make it, but I would have never guessed in a million years that Judah would have had the success that he had, because when he was starting out, he was kind of, I mean, we all start out green, but I remember sitting at open mic saying to myself, I don't get this guy, and he was very clean cut back then, not with the beard and the whole thing. And I never dreamed that he would have the success that he had. So,
cry laughing. I because when he did like his crowd work though, it's just like, oh my God.
It's a very tough business, because I always say to people, sometimes we in the business make people a bigger star than they really actually are, because there are so many comedians. Like I had a comedian once say to me, do me a favor, Al, don't have your street team promote my name in Times Square, right? It really, especially if I'm not there on any given night. First of all, I don't have control over some obscure guy in Times Square who got a hold of my tickets and he's lying about who's on the show. I'm sure, Nicky, you ran into a few of these at the door.
Oh, yes.
The
Oh,
Tina
yes.
Fey's and all that. But
Everyone would yell at me. I was like, Tina Fey doesn't even do stand-up.
yeah, exactly. So, but uh, this particular comic said, don't have them mention my name. I really, it really hurts my brand. And I said, your brand, nobody gives a shit who you are. Nobody knows who you are. And I'll tell you what, I'll make you a bet. I'll take my $10. You pay me 10. I'll take your $10 versus my 100. If we ask 10 people on the street who you are, I bet you none of them know who you are. And he wouldn't take my bet.
Oh, wow.
Yep, because he knew.
Yeah, of course.
He knew. I don't know what the hell he was trying to pull with me that day, but
Now, Al, when you first started, you were a comedian first. Did you ever, was it always an interest of you to owning a club, or was it more of like that business side of you? When did that come into the picture?
Well, I did stand-up comedy for about 2 years before, running a club ever came up. But I never really had any aspirations to be a comedian. Unlike a lot of people, the whole life they wanted to be a comedian. It never dawned on me. I was always more of a business person. I used to love to go to comedy clubs, on dates and stuff, but never dreamed about doing it. And then, as it says in the book, I dated a girl that was a comic, an open mic comic, and she asked me to come watch her. And it was pretty painful to watch her at an open mic. But whenever someone asks you how they did, you always tend to lie a little bit and say, "Oh, you were great. You were very funny," But she kept asking me. She asked me like 10 times in a row. I couldn't take it anymore. I said, "You know what? You sucked. Okay, you really were bad."
Now, did you always want to write a book? So the book's called "I Did It on a Dare."
Wait, so how did that?
Was that the
Nicky,
dare?
Adam's on something here. Yeah, so basically we got into a big fight about it, and we were going back and forth and arguing, and finally she said, "You know what? You think you're so funny? Why don't you go on a stage and tell a joke?" And she dared me, and a week later I went to Pip's Comedy Club and probably bombed worse than she did, So. But I had a little problem that night. Andrew Dice Clay came in after I waited 3 hours. It was 11:30 at night. Andrew Dice Clay came in, and he went to do his 45 minutes of his HBO special. He ran it through, and he crushed. And the entire audience got up. This was at Pip's Comedy Club. I don't know if you've ever performed there. The bar was in the showroom. So everybody got up, went to the bar to talk to Andrew Dice Clay. Now, I want to just show you, not only are young comedians delusional, but people who eventually go on to own comedy clubs doing comedy can be very delusional. Because there I was, my first time ever on stage. Andrew Dice Clay is at the bar, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? On the spur of the moment, I decided this. Maybe I better do some dirty material.
Oh, God.
So I decided to do dirty material to impress Andrew Dice Clay. So maybe he'll take me on a nationwide tour with him.
Yeah.
Talk about delusions of grandeur, right? And needless to say, that turned out very bad.
Did you ever book Dice at any of your clubs?
I never booked him. He was the kind of act, that would just drop in. Booking a guy like him in a 180 seat room is usually not economical. He needs those 300 seat rooms.
But did you tell him that story? Did you ever tell him I was the guy that went on after
you? Well,
you?
he popped in a couple of nights when I wasn't there, so I didn't get a chance to tell him. But
he was on a show I was on.
Yeah.
The 11 o'clock one night he came in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, at Broadway.
Yep.
Broadway? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he would drop in at Broadway. Sometimes he'd bring his son in, too. His son was trying to see if he wanted to be a stand-up comic, but he was a very good musician. I remember that.
And then Rosie used to come all the time, right? Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah, Rosie lived right down the block. So she actually lived on 53rd Street, I believe. Right, Nicky? Was it?
Yeah.
Do you remember? Yeah, she lived on the block. So she would come in and do spots, and she was, it's funny how your perception of, people could be molded by the media and the news, and you get one aspect. But every time I ever talked to Rosie, she was the sweetest person in the world. I mean, really nice. So I don't know where it all comes from sometimes.
That happens with me with Kurt Schilling, the baseball player. You hear
Oh yeah. Oh right.
I met him a couple times at like charity events. Nicest guy ever. You almost want to not like the person because of what you hear, and then you just can't believe how nice the person is.
Right. Like I heard something about him the other day. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? And people were trashing him. But then I said, you know what? Maybe I missed something on him. I went to look at his lifetime statistics. I said, why is there even a doubt? The guy, was a very good ball player.
OJ still in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah. If OJ's in the Hall of Fame, I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame already. Not to get too crazy here,
Seriously, I think when you double murder some people, you double murder, I think you're not going to remove that person. Then let's fucking
right. Yeah, I guess people say civilly he got convicted, but I guess the argument people are making is criminally. But he's out there looking for the killer yet, so don't worry. We might.
Now, at one point you had three. I remember New York Comedy Club. To me, it was awesome. I loved it. Other people were like, and I remember Chris Basile was working for you, opened up Gotham, and that happened. And
right.
And then you opened up Broadway, which everyone thought you were crazy. Because everyone's like,
right. Because the Laugh Factory opened up 5 blocks away.
So the Laugh Factory's there. You got Caroline's there. Like at the time, I was running Gladys's, and I was actually running Joe Franklin's comedy club. There was like, There was it was like, and all. They're like, how's Broadway gonna do? It's on 8th Avenue. It's not even where the
side street.
Not even where the foot traffic is. Like people are like, it's not gonna last. It's downstairs. Like, how did you make that work?
Well, we had an incredible street team, for one, that was out there in Times Square, and probably the size of it surpassed all those other venues. I don't think when Jamie Masada came to New York that he was prepared or knew the market of New York. He was like an out-of-town player coming into my home field advantage. I knew the angles. So they didn't really do a lot of new talent shows. They didn't really know how to do the street team. They had to catch up on that a little bit. And then he got a little cocky with them. And then I wound up getting his guys. And then he ran into some issues. I don't know if you heard why he left New York. Did you ever get that story?
No.
In New York, they have a law called the 50-50 law. That is, you're allowed to do pornography in certain zoned areas of New York. If it was called 60-40 law, if 60% of the facility, was used for non-pornographic purposes, and 40% was for whatever else you want to use it, you can then keep the pornography. So the owner of the strip club, Show World, that was there, they did live sex shows, they did the photo booths, they did the whole thing, Right. So they went into partnership with Jamie. So Jamie had 40% of that space, and that's where he opened up the Laugh Factory. That place was owned by a guy named I think Gene Benascio. His brother was Gorgeous Vinny Benascio, who was, I think, either a captain or the head of one of the crime families in New York. And one day, Jamie started complaining. It was all in the Daily News. You can Google this. Jamie Masada, Laugh Factory, leave New York, and an article in the Daily News will probably come up. And they ran a whole expose how basically he upped and moved in the middle of the night and left New York and was never seen again, until he got to L.A., went back home.
Probably a good move.
Yeah, probably a good move. They basically said to him, listen, get the fuck out of here. or they'll find you in Monday's trash.
Well, I remember I did comedy at Gramercy.
Same kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, which was a strip club called Tens, right? And then when I think it was Giuliani was there, they figured out like how to take down the mob by getting rid of doing that rule. So
Right.
first it was like it was a strip club and it was like fine dining. That's what you want to do is eat fine dining next to. Then that didn't work. And it was like ballroom dancing with the strippers, right? So after a while it became comedy club, strip club, and they hired me to run the shows. So I walk in there, the comics are getting paid in like funny money. Right. I ended up like dating one of the girls. It was a fucking, it was a disaster. That was crazy.
Yeah, but not bad for the comics, I guess, right?
No, the comics loved it because you got like a full course meal. You got like the prettiest women ever, like naked women walking by. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
I remember like DC Benny like was there every show that I did. DC Benny. And then Lampanelli was there. Lampanelli got mad at me one time.
Notice Nicky is very quiet during this part.
I heard beautiful woman. I was
it completely bores him.
but then you opened up. So then you moved New York Comedy Club. It was 24th between 2nd and 3rd, and now it's where?
Well, it's still there, but I sold it in 2014, so I'm no longer at New York Comedy Club. But I did open Greenwich Village Comedy Club on McDougal Street in 2012. So I have Greenwich and I have Broadway still.
Got it. And then at one point you had one in Florida, right? Didn't you have a?
Yeah, I had a New York Comedy Club in Florida. It's now known as the Boca Black Box, but it was it was a 350-seat showroom. You done it? Yeah.
I didn't realize that was New York Comedy Club.
That was New York Comedy Club in the early 2000s. And it was a beautiful 350-seat room. We had Brett Butler, Artie Lang, Gilbert Godfrey, Pauly Shaw. You know, one of the stories in the book about Pauly Shaw is funny. It was Pauly Shaw's turn to go up. And it was like a minute till they were going to bring him up. We couldn't find him anywhere. And we went outside of the club on that boardwalk that they had over there. And we're running all over looking for him. And it turned out he was in an Asian spa 2 doors down.
I wonder what he was doing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a yank. We go, come on, you're going to be on stage in a minute, you know? But he was quite a character.
Did you have to get permission from him to tell the story or no?
No, listen, that was a true story, you know? I mean, it happened. So.
But are you worried about anybody saying, like, backlash as far as, like, celebrities being like, hey, that, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, that's my story. That's how I remember it. And, you know, if they remember it differently, they could just write their own book.
I like that. Good for you. I always wonder, though, sometimes when books come out, how people do that, you know?
Yeah. Tell us about some of your favorite stories in the book.
Well, definitely that Artie Lang story, if you remember it, where he was performing with Reverend Bob Levy. And Bob Levy was on stage with Beetlejuice. If you know who Beetlejuice is, the little short little guy from the Howard Stern show. So they used to do a bit where they would put cream cheese on a woman's ass and Beetlejuice would lick it off. And what happened was a woman was there with her boyfriend. Boyfriend goes to the bathroom. She volunteers to go on stage. She's in front of 350 people getting her butthole licked by this little Beetlejuice. The boyfriend comes out of the bathroom, is horrified, and sees this whole thing going on. After the show is over, I was fixated on them for some reason. I see him get up, and he does a beeline for the dressing room to go there and probably beat the crap out of Bob Levy. And I go in there, and Artie is in there, and Bob Levy's in there, and it's like a free-for-all in the dressing room. All of a sudden, this guy gets out, and my dopey partner says to me, hey, you know, Al, he didn't pay the check. I said, that's what you're worried about?
was that what happened?
So he goes out in the parking lot and chases the guy down. He goes, hey, buddy, you didn't pay your check. And the guy goes, screw you. Now, my partner was also a lawyer. He goes, we're going to sue you. Sue you? What, are you kidding me?
We're going to sue you for the mozzarella sticks.
Yeah, we're going to sue you for the mozzarella sticks. Then my partner jumps on his hood as he's backing out. Okay, and the guy then starts doing circular moves in the parking lot to try to shake him off the car. My partner had a toupee, the worst toupee you ever saw in your life, and it flew off and landed on the windshield, and the guy couldn't see where it was going.
Oh
Was
my
there.
God.
And then it blows off. I kind of like pick it up, and then my partner like falls off the hood, comes back. I give him the toupee. He goes, "I guess the secret is out now." I
Oh
go,
my.
"Secret? You had freaking birds nesting in that thing. Are you kidding me?"
That
And
is
then Artie told the
hilarious.
story that Monday on the Stern Show, and it was classic. It was a
Artie was
classic
like
story on it.
he's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Artie Lang.
Really the nicest. They're when he's going through some of the hard times that he did, and people would somehow come out of the woodwork and sort of knock him. I would always say, hey, this guy really. There's not a charity in the world that Artie would not perform for. Him and Dave Attell are incredible in that way, and it's funny because they're pretty good friends. But I never seen Attell or Artie Lang ever not give of themselves on a fundraising show for another comic or for any good cause. They're incredible people.
It's funny sometimes. Like I tell people that. Like I used to open for a comic that he was like, Mr. G-rated guy and Family Guy and NBC and this and that, and all the families would come out, and after the show he'd be doing blow with hookers and cheating on his wife,
Yeah, right.
and then I'd open up for a guy like Mitch Fatel or somebody like who just talks about like the most disgusting shit ever, and the most loyal, kindest human being. I'm not
Mitch Patel is a really nice guy. I
the
mean,
nicest, right? It's
sweetheart.
just
Yeah,
sometimes people's
yeah.
acts aren't who they are as
Right,
people,
right,
you know?
right, right. Very, very nice guy. Very quiet, sweet guy, for
Yeah.
sure.
I remember
And
like your shows literally would be like Godfrey or Wally Collins, Todd Barry, Mitch Fatel,
yeah,
DC Benny, Rich Voss was a murderer.
yeah.
Rich
I mean, there is another nice guy, DC Benny. That guy is one of the nicest guys in comedy.
yeah.
Chill, easygoing guy, and I've watched him grow through the years as a tremendous comic, and a good family guy, So Tom Cotter's another one,
Greg
a real
Rogel. I mean,
Greg Rogel, really nice
that's what
guy
kind of
too.
bothers me about this
Now,
whole
Greg
thing.
Rogel's only a nice guy if you pronounce his name Greg with two G's.
Oh, really?
If you put Greg one G, you see a different Greg Rogel.
But it's funny though, because people always tell me like that, like a lot of these old school comics that they're not internet savvy. They're not good at TikTok or Vine or Instagram or whatever. So people don't know who they are. And they're like, oh, did you see this guy, that guy? And I go back to the days of, Russ Beneves and the Judah Friedlanders and the Orny Adams and the Pete
Right,
Correalis and the Rogels. And I'm like, dude, these guys they suck at social media or at
right.
podcasting. But when it comes to just comedy, like these like
They're the best.
and like Chris
Those are
guys
the guys you want to watch.
like Chris D'Elia, like they couldn't do 20 minutes after these guys,
Well, Pete,
like,
you mentioned Pete Correale. He's another guy. I mean, he at one time very early on when he was starting out, he was an intern and a busboy for us. He talk about hustling. He got an apartment in Manhattan. He was a superintendent of a building living in Sutton Place, one of the best neighborhoods in the country. He got an apartment there, and he would put out the trash and clean the place. Then he'd come to New York Comedy Club at night, flip hamburgers in the kitchen, and then he'd do a spot. And it took him 7 years, I think. He was one of the faster ones I've ever seen to really come up. And the next thing I know, I'm sitting in the audience and backstage with him when he's getting ready to do the Tonight Show.
yeah,
So
yeah. Those
incredible.
guys were all like guys that I was like, oh my god, they would blow out the rooms. I mean, they would blow out the rooms, And
We had some incredible, like I remember one late night show at New York Comedy Club in the late 90s, early 2000s had Damon Wayans in for a guest spot, Tracy Morgan, Wanda Sykes, And this little guy that everybody was making fun of because he was so short, and it turned out that guy became the biggest of them all, Kevin Hart.
Yeah, I remember Kevin Hart they used to all make fun of Kevin Hart. They used to, because
He used to come in every week, and everybody would give this poor guy a hard time,
yeah.
in a loving manner, right? But yeah,
But he
Kevin
only
Hart.
had like 12 minutes. He had like 12 good minutes. And then
Well, he was one of those actor types that Nicky mentioned before. He was
yeah.
more of an actor, and he came in with his manager, or someone who said he was his manager, and he said, that how that whole thing goes. And he goes, "Oh, this guy's very funny and whatever." And we gave him a shot. It was late night, and maybe somebody didn't show up. Who knows? And look where he went with it.
Yeah.
So another one who you work hard, you're gonna make it usually. You talk about someone overachieves, look like a Mike Machete, who would ever dream, but he's done some pretty good stuff along the way. So
Yeah.
I love Mike.
Yeah. I mean,
everybody loves him, but Mike has got a very evil side to him too. Very angry, evil side that only Al Martin knows because I've known him almost 30 years. But
I remember I took Chris Murphy's class like 22 years ago at the comedy, and he's sitting there, all the comics going on, and he's writing. And I'm like, oh, wow, what a great teacher. I look over, he's drawing little wrestlers.
Well, nobody said comedians are normal. We're all out of our. I remember Chris Mazzilli. He also worked for me for the first 4 or 5 years of his thing. He was started as an intern and then a manager, and then, as you said, he went on to open Gotham. But Chris used to doodle. He used to doodle Corvettes, the Corvettes.
Yeah.
And now, if you Google Chris Mazzilli, he's one of the foremost authorities in the world on Corvettes.
Really?
What?
And that's how him and Jerry Seinfeld became so close, because they're both into muscle cars. He's one of the foremost authorities on muscle cars in the world. That's another book someday I like to do, is the side hustle of every comedian and what their side hustles are.
Chris gave me some pretty good advice, though. I remember, like, when I first started, I was awful. I dumped beer on my head. I had an Ice Ice Baby shirt. It was just I was 19. I thought
You dumped beer on your head?
Yeah, it made my friends laugh in college. So I was like, hey guys, look at this. So I remember, 7 years later, I go up to Chris Mazzilli and I'm like, hey, can you look at me? He goes, honestly, it's hard to get out of my head how bad you were.
Right.
And I was like, fuck, man.
Yeah, well, that's a piece of advice I give in the book to people. Find a club that'll put you up and use that club as your laboratory, and just fuck up at that one club.
Yeah.
And then when you're ready to branch out, that way you've sort of done damage control. Only one club knows you're bad.
Yeah.
And then, exactly. So that's the important way to do it.
And I agree with that too, because I think that you could really develop too at one place. You don't need to be running all over the city. If you have one club that's supportive of you and puts you up all the time,
Exactly.
you can really develop there.
Exactly, because then when you're ready, you start to show up in the other clubs as a polished act, not as Adam had experienced it with Mazzilli. Unfortunately, when he was doing New York Comedy Club, Mazzilli was the manager. So years later, when Mazzilli had his own club, he killed himself with another club.
Yeah.
But he had no way of knowing that,
Yeah. Well, so many. Well,
hey, is that background Broadway's? It looks like Broadway's background.
Probably. But like so many comedy clubs, so many comedians are like, hey, I've done comedy for a month. When can I get paid? And I'm just like, dude, you have no idea. I mean, look, to me, comedy is like, you remember that Revenge? I think it was Raiders of the Lost Ark, when like Indiana Jones had to get to that like crystal, and it was like the hardest thing ever. He had to go, like, the bricks kept disappearing, and that's how it is comedy. There's no fucking rhyme or reason. And
no rhyme or reason. There's no one path to get to where you have to go. There really isn't.
And that's the beautiful thing, but it's also like the most horrible thing. It's like with med school, you do A, B, C, D, you become a doctor. Like you said, there are comedians out there that they do everything right. They're clean, they're family friendly, they've got a great personality, but they can't get to that thing. And then there's the comics that like, hey, don't do props. And then Carrot Top is making what, 20 million a year in Vegas? You know?
So who's to say what's right and what's wrong? You know, exactly. Don't do props, and then you got Carrot Top making a fortune. You know, don't steal material, and then you got what's his name?
Mencia?
Yeah, Mencia. So you know, who knows? And you know, may he rest in peace. Robin Williams was brilliant, and probably his brilliance was in making it look like he was improvisational all the time, but he really worked very hard. Like whatever he would do that looked like it was a, you know, spur of the moment was really well, you know, fleshed out in the clubs. But he had a reputation for a while of borrowing
Stealing
material as well.
Yep.
He would sit in the back at clubs and take a lot of notes.
Yeah.
I heard people wouldn't want him in the room when they went up because of that.
There were a lot of people who didn't want him in the room. And there are certain comics right now in the New York circuit that many comedians tell me they don't particularly like when they're in the room and working with them, you know? So some comics have even called out others in the green room, you know, and told them in a nice way, hey, that's not really a nice thing to do. You know, you really should stop doing it. Because listen, as a comic, many comics, the overwhelming of the amount of them live in poverty. They don't, you know, they don't make a lot of money. But the one thing you do have is your act. And if you don't have your act, you know, then what do you have? And so if someone's stealing that, they're stealing like the only thing you really have in your life.
Right.
Do you think podcasting has helped or hurt comedy?
Well, you know, there you go. Podcasting is like doing stand-up comedy. Why are there some podcasts that zoom up and really do well and have a big audience? And there are some podcasts that just kind of like, they're there, you know? I mean, you know, like sometimes I've done a couple of these podcasts, and then when people put them up on YouTube or a YouTube channel, and then I check the views, you know, some of them have 700-800 views or 1,000, and some of them have 6, you know? So I think, you know, I think with podcasts, you have to know how to market it. You have to know how to promote it. You have to get it on as many platforms as possible. Yep. You know, and I think if there's ever an opportunity to do well on podcasting, it's right now.
Yeah.
Because this is the time when certain guests would be available that they would not ordinarily be available. Like I've seen people on certain podcasts interview way above their heads, meaning, you know, there may be an open micer doing a podcast, and all of a sudden I see like
Ellen or something.
Ellen on there doing an interview because she's bored out of her skull, just sitting in her house doing tiddlywinks because she's on quarantine, you know? So you really have a shot to get better guests than you might ordinarily get because of COVID.
Now, as far as this whole PC culture, people getting fired on, because at first Twitter was amazing. I'm like, wow, this is like a platform where I could just try out jokes. And then it became, well, no, it's a platform to get fired. How do you deal with, like, as a club owner, a comic goes up there and makes a joke that like 90% of people go ooh, but or boo or whatever?
You know what it is? I don't entertain it, and I don't deal with it, and I don't entertain it. If you're going to make, and I'm thinking when we come back to put this sign in my room, if you're sensitive and you can't take jokes about anybody and everybody, please don't walk in these doors. This is not going to be a safe space for you. It's a safe space for the comedians.
Great.
And let them, you know, and that's the way every comedy club should be. If you're going to get your feelings, if you're going to sit there and laugh about everything, but then the one thing that touches you, you're going to want to cancel, get out of here. What are you? You're like a selfish prick, in my opinion.
You're ruining the time for everyone.
Yeah, I'll laugh at the Jews. I'll laugh at the Italians. I'll laugh at the gays. I'm hitting everything with you, right? I'll laugh at everybody. Oh my God, you made a joke about autism. I have a fourth cousin that has autism. That's horrible. You can't do that, you know? I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, it's
Crazy.
crazy because also they keep pushing forward. As soon as you give them power, they go, all right, this next thing's
That's
canceled.
right. That's right.
They're never gonna be like, okay, we're good.
And
Right.
it's
You
freedom of
can't.
speech.
Right. You can't. Well, that seems to. I now call it freedom of speech with consequences. If you want to exercise your freedom of speech, you're going to have to be aware that there's going to be consequences. But I'd rather just close the doors. I'm not, rather
Yeah.
than have someone tell me who could be on a stage, because that's not what it was supposed to ever be about. Some of your greatest comedians of all time would have never made it to the stage today. Guys like
Prior.
people like Joan Rivers, people like Lenny Bruce, people like George Carlin, or even Eddie Murphy, or Chris Rock, or Richard Pryor. None of these people would have made it, because at some point they had to kind of pick on somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
With today's cancel culture, I think it just really, to me, like I feel like it just forces people to step up the writing. If it's an intelligent joke and it's well written and well crafted,
Right.
I feel like the
Yeah.
low hanging fruit you can't do anymore. Just
I don't know.
because it's not. I feel like
I
everybody.
get more people after shows thanking me for not giving in. Going, hey,
Yeah.
look, thank you. I can't hear this on the TV anymore. I can't hear this on Netflix. I can't hear this on the internet. Thank you.
Oh, that's why Comedy Central's ratings are not what they once were, because people just, it's just tiring already. I'm in the corner hashtag cancel culture,
But don't you
really.
think also Comedy Central became too much of a business where the management company behind Comedy Central started just booking their acts and like their
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
and then that kind of ruins it for other people who are not in their circle.
Not in their clique, not in their circle, and probably not always not the funniest guys in the world. You want the really funny guys. Go out on those road circuits and see some of those. Guys like Gemini, Bob Levy. These guys can perform in any kind of venue, any kind of audience, and there could be 3 people in the room. They're gonna make the room laugh. They do private parties, bar mitzvahs. They don't care.
That's what I've always liked about your club, though. Also, is that you didn't give a shit about, like, let's say the status of whoever. Like, yeah, you'd if somebody had 1 billion followers, you'd put them up, but you were about who's gonna make people laugh.
You mentioned Rich Voss. Rich Voss started out as one of those kind of comics. He had the very, long hair. It was like very greasy, long hair. He was known as a bit of a road hack. All he would do was the road. And then he kind of befriended a couple of guys who hit it on Comedy Central, also who were kind of New Jersey road comics. Norton and Jim Florentine.
Yeah.
Jim Florentine started out as Jen and Jim Florentine, and the nicest guy you could ever meet. Gave me a lot of work starting out, always believed in me and stuff. But, when he got his break with Crank Anchors and stuff on TV, he brought along a lot of guys. Norton, and he brought along Rich Voss. And then Rich Voss hit on Last Comic Standing and was on his way. But, those guys get, and that's another thing I talk about. It's very important to develop good friendships with people on your way up, because you never know, any of these guys can hit. They'll start taking you along for the ride, and that's great. That's a very big part of doing stand-up comedy, making those connections and friends in your career as you go along. Sometimes that's more important than sending some guy your link on your set.
Jim Norton's the kind of guy, a perfect example of somebody who will go up there and talk about having sex with transgenders and this and that.
Yeah, he don't care.
But then he would be like the kindest soul ever. Like the dude would do anything. He's just a sweetheart of a guy. But
very nice guy. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But, he'll talk about anything, and that's probably why he has his niche and people like him.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about getting peed on by prostitutes.
Al, if somebody wanted to open up,
yeah.
Al, if somebody wanted to open up a club in New York, what would be your advice to them?
personally, I think well, first of all, now you'd have to be demented to open up a club because there's no business. We don't know when we're opening. I mean, they've outright said here in New York, "Oh, you're closed indefinitely." Like, what does that mean? Like, do I tell my staff never, like, let them go on vacation? What if they, one of the things we're worried about, we thought we would be open in early August. And so people were taking their vacations or they wanted to go away and leave New York and they started coming back. And then all of a sudden the mayor announces, oh no, we don't like the idea of anything indoors being open. Well, how are you going to feel about that in December, in November? LA is okay for outdoor stuff. New York isn't,
Yeah.
so.
What do you think about comics right now? Because I had a gig in Vegas and I had a gig in Florida. Both got canceled in July. But I see there are comics right now doing shows, and I know that they're like getting paid what I would have gotten paid, which is not like they're not making $25,000 a show or $50,000 a show. They're making it a couple thousand at best for the week, and probably even less than that because they got to divide it by half because the crowds. You can only let in half the crowd. Probably not even getting that.
Right.
I've had owners, hey, will you come to Florida but get paid a third of what you're? I'm like, no, but comics are still doing it. What do you think about these comics?
Well, listen, everybody's got to make decisions for their own particular situation. I don't know if they've got a family to feed, if they've got a mortgage to pay. So I'm never going to pass any kind of judgment on that with comedians. They got to do what they got to do. I was talking to the owner of the Boca Black Box down here in Florida, the one that used to be New York Comedy Club, and one of the issues they're having is because of the perception in Florida of the infection rate, not perception, it's actually going up again. I think yesterday they had 11,000 new cases, a record for them. Although, I'll tell you, that the hospitalizations seem to be way down, and it looks like about 1% of the people that are getting the corona now are dying. 1%. So that's a very small percentage. Of course, any people that die of anything, you don't want, especially if it's your family member, you don't really want to hear it. But at some point, governments are going to have to start to make that decision that the fatality rate has gotten very low. So we can't totally keep the economy closed. And I say that as a business person because it goes up the chain. If I'm not open, my employees don't work. If my employees don't work, they can't spend money. If they can't spend money, the local businesses that they buy their groceries from or they buy, products from are going to be hurting. The people that sell to the grocery stores are going to be hurting. If I'm not open, I don't pay my landlord rent. If my landlord doesn't get rent, how does he pay the bank the mortgage? How does he pay the government the property taxes? If the bank is not getting their money, you see how it can go up the line. At some point, I think what's got to happen is you got to open, and anybody who is susceptible to getting sick easily and they have a compromised immune system really should not have a lot of contact in public until there is a cure for this virus or a vaccine for the virus. But up until then, you got to start opening things up or else there's not going to be anything to open to. That's the tough thing we're all facing here.
Yeah.
When you reopen, will it be... When you reopen, will it be a 4-drink minimum?
Well, there you go. There's the problem because let me give you my synopsis of what my life has been. I get closed down for no reason of my own. Well, there's a virus, of course, but I got closed down for that. Now, to stay in business, most businesses will probably have to take loans to, be able to function until such time as they can reopen. So no, I'm closed. I don't get any income. Now I got to take loans at my age, which is going to be 62 tomorrow, to hope,
Happy
hope
birthday.
that I can. Thank you. So I got to take a loan to stay in business, right? And then so I can pay back the loan, I have to start working. But then I'm told I can't open up indefinitely. So it's like, and on top of it, any kind of benefit I'm getting, like unemployment, is going to stop on July 31st because, Congress
Yeah.
can't, get their shit together. And a lot of comedians are going to lose that $600 a week that they've been getting, during all this. So it's really all a mess. It really is a mess.
Yeah, what do you think is going to happen? Because for that exact reason, right? So unemployment all of a sudden, July 31st. Do you think it's going to extend it to the end of the year, or?
Well, listen, I think the only way that happens, it looks like the Democrats want to do that. The Republicans don't. So they're both playing hardball on their positions. But as often happens in politics, there's going to be something that the Republicans want that the Democrats don't. So maybe they come to an agreement. We'll let you have, instead of December 31st, maybe go to October 1st or something. But give us something, so,
Right.
I think that's what's going to happen.
Oh,
They'll make some sort of deal because at the end of the day, in an election year, no party wants to be the one to say, you can't have the goodies.
no, I'm on Facebook and I see all these comics already that are like looking into other jobs, and I'm just like, whoa, like.
Well,
wow.
you got to be prepared because listen, first of all, Congress, unless they extend it, they go on hiatus in 2 weeks on July 20th. So unless they extend the session, if they don't have a deal by July 20th, that thing's going to expire July 31st.
Looks like we're doing Zoom every night, Nicky. Zoom
That's
show.
right.
Well, you know what? I personally think that the compromise on that, if Al Martin was president, what I would say is, whoever has the opportunity to go back to work, like their state or their industry has reopened, should have that $600 a week taken away so they, get up off their ass and go back to work. But if there are comics who live in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut that are not reopened and they're getting that $600 a week to survive, I think that should be extended. So I think it's a little more case by case than just a blanket, okay, we're extending it for everybody.
Right.
I think in the states that remain closed, you should have an extension. In the states that have reopened, that extension should be taken, that perk should be taken away.
Yeah, it's difficult when it's a road comic like myself, because I'm like, okay, what states can I work in? Kind of.
Right. It's very difficult. Listen, the whole thing's a mess. I've been told to stay in. I have to close, not by my own wanting. To stay in business, I pretty much have to take some loans out. Most of those loans go to my employees and my landlord if I want it to be forgiven. And then when it's time to reopen, I'm told, I don't know when you can reopen. Like, oh, and by the way, I'm taking away any benefits you have from unemployment after I've paid into the system for like 30 years. So it's crazy.
Wow.
The whole thing's crazy.
You have a pretty good attitude, because I feel like I would be I wouldn't be smiling if I was you, if it was in your shoes. So, I mean, this is not, you worked your whole life, you built this comedy empire. Now to have to take a loan, that must be so frustrating and disappointing because you have paid into the system.
Yeah, it's very frustrating, and I'm very pissed, and listen, if you ask me how I am on Monday, it's very different than Wednesday. I go up and down with this. There are days I'm saying, I'm seeing what retirement is like. Maybe I'll just stay retired, and not have to deal with this rat race of crazy neighbors next door and Yelp reviews and government red tape and regulation and the employees who are fighting with each other and don't get along, and the comics who don't get along, and I won't work your room if that guy works that room, and if a comic works my room, he can't work your room. After 30 years of it, it's a lot of bullshit, and sometimes I get very tired. And then there are other days I wake up and say, wait a second, I worked hard for this. Why should I just walk away, and give it up? And then, I go back and forth. I'm normal like that.
Now we need you, Al.
We need you.
We for real need guys like you saying, if you're offended, get the fuck out.
Yeah, it's like
stay
my
home.
wife says. Yeah, my wife says, listen, there's no decision that has to be made today. Just stay with it and see how the cards play out. If I've learned anything from this, there's no such thing as a 5-year plan. It's like you can't have a 5-week plan. We just don't know where this whole thing is landing. They can come up with a vaccine tomorrow, and then everything is good. So
what's the name of your book, and where can people find it?
it's Did It on a Dare: How I Built a Comedy Empire in 30 Short Years. And soon we're going to add the tag, How Corona Destroyed It in 3 months.
And where can people get this book?
It's available on Amazon, Amazon Kindle, Amazon paperback. It's available on iTunes in an audio book. So a lot of different ways. And as soon as things open up, I'll be doing autograph signings. We have one scheduled whenever that happens at Broadway Comedy Club, Greenwich Village Comedy Club, and at the Friars Club. We're going to do it there.
Well, Al, thank you, man, and thank you.
I love you, Al.
Thanks for being the first club to give me a shot.
Thank
Me
you,
too.
Adam, Nikki. It's been great. Thank you. I'm glad we were able to do it.
Absolutely. Take care, man.
Bye,
Take care,
Al.
guys. Bye.